The universe, in its infinite wisdom and equally infinite capacity for cosmic pranks, had decided that Caresh 9 would be the worst possible place for a multi-species research expedition to lose power. Not because the planet was particularly dangerous, mind you. The local fauna consisted mostly of slug-like creatures that moved at the approximate speed of continental drift, and the flora was so aggressively beige that it made institutional cafeteria food look vibrant by comparison. No, Caresh 9 earned its reputation through sheer atmospheric spite. Every 72 hours, give or take a few minutes for dramatic timing, the planet's magnetic field threw what could only be described as an electromagnetic temper tantrum. These storms didn't just interfere with electronics, they lobotomized them, fried them, turned sophisticated quantum processors into very expensive paperweights, assuming anyone still used paper, which they didn't, because this was an advanced civilization that had moved beyond such primitive things. The expedition had landed 6 days ago, with enough redundant systems to power a small moon. Triple-shielded fusion cores, backup antimatter cells, solar collectors that could squeeze energy from a burned-out star, and enough fail-safes to make a paranoid AI weep with joy. The scientists had prepared for everything, except, apparently, for the possibility that Caresh 9's storms had been getting stronger, much stronger. The kind of stronger that made triple-shielded sound adorable. The expedition leader, a Vortilian named Caresh, stood in what used to be the command center and currently resembled an expensive junkyard. His 3 eye stalks drooped in a way that his species reserved for funerals and budget meetings. Around him, 7 other researchers from 6 different species poked at their dead equipment with the futile hope of people checking if the refrigerator light really does turn off when you close the door. "Status report," Caresh said, though his flat tone suggested he already knew the answer and wasn't going to enjoy it. A Mytharian, her crystalline body refracting the weak sunlight filtering through the habitat dome, chimed in with sounds like wind through broken glass. "The fusion core is slag. The backup cells are leaking. The solar panels are now excellent frisbees. We have no power, no way to generate power, and the rescue beacon is approximately as functional as my enthusiasm for this mission." "So we're waiting 3 weeks for the scheduled check-in?" asked a planarian, his scaled tail twitching nervously. 3 weeks on emergency rations, in an unpowered habitat, on a planet where the temperature drops to -40 at night. Fantastic. This is exactly how I wanted to spend my research sabbatical. The Mytharian's chiming took on a distinctly sarcastic edge. In the corner, largely unnoticed, sat the human. Marcus Chen had the distinction of being the least credentialed member of the expedition, which was saying something, considering everyone else held multiple doctoral degrees from institutions, with names that took longer to say than some species' lifespans. He was listed as maintenance engineer, which was really just a polite way of saying he fixed things when they broke, and performed the kind of grunt work that was beneath beings who could calculate quantum probabilities in their sleep. He'd been watching the proceedings with the sort of quiet attention that everyone assumed was confusion. Humans were new to the galactic community, relatively speaking, and most species still operated under the impression that they were enthusiastic but ultimately limited creatures. Sure, they'd invented nuclear weapons before they'd invented proper spaceships, which was impressively backwards, but that was more concerning than impressive. "What about mechanical power generation?" Marcus asked. 7 alien heads, eye stalks and sensory organs turned to stare at him. "Mechanical what?" Thor's translator struggled with the concept. "You know, moving parts, spinning things, converting kinetic energy into electrical energy." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for someone suggesting you could fly by flapping your arms really hard. The Vortilian's eye stalks quivered, which might have been laughter or possibly an aneurysm. Are you suggesting we somehow create electricity from motion, manually? It's not that crazy. Basic electromagnetic induction. Move a conductor through a magnetic field, generate current. It's like introductory physics. A Kelvorian, whose species had mastered quantum entanglement communication before humans had figured out agriculture, made a sound that the translator rendered as polite condescension. Yes, we're all familiar with the primitive principles. What we lack are the specialized materials, the precision manufacturing, the computational calibration needed to create something even remotely functional. We're not savages. Right, not savages, just 7 people sitting in the dark, complaining about being cold. That landed with less diplomacy than Marcus had intended, but he was tired, hungry, and increasingly annoyed by the air of sophisticated helplessness permeating the camp. The Metharian chimed in, literally, even if such a device were theoretically possible with our current resources, which I doubt, the energy output would be negligible. A child's toy. A child's toy that makes light, Marcus said, standing up. Look, I'm going to poke around the salvage. You folks keep discussing how impossible everything is. That seems productive. Thor waved a manipulator appendage in dismissal. Do as you wish. Try not to injure yourself on the wreckage. Marcus left the command center, already mentally cataloging what he'd seen scattered around the camp. The condescension didn't bother him much. He'd dealt with enough tenured professors back on Earth to develop immunity to academic snobbery, and alien academic snobbery was just regular academic snobbery with more eye stalks. The expedition had brought enough equipment to study everything from soil composition to atmospheric ionization patterns, which meant they had magnets. Lots of magnets, the kind used for spectrometers and containment fields, and half a dozen other instruments that were currently very dead, but still physically intact. They also had wire, miles of it, superconducting fiber optic neural net whatever cables that cost more than a house. Sure, but also plain old copper wiring in the structural systems, because sometimes you just needed something to carry a current from point A to point B without requiring a particle physics degree. Over the next 6 hours, while the aliens held what appeared to be a symposium on their impending doom, Marcus scavenged. He pulled magnets from the spectroscopy equipment, apologizing quietly to the dead machines. He stripped copper wire from access panels, carefully labeling what came from where in case they ever needed to put things back together. He found ball bearings in the habitat's rotation joints, a metal frame from a collapsed solar panel array, insulation from the destroyed backup generator. The planarian found him in the salvage area, surrounded by organized piles of components. What are you doing? Building a generator. From garbage. From resources. There's a difference. The planarian's scales rippled in what might have been curiosity. You actually believe you can create functional power generation from these materials? Won't know until I try. You want to help or critique? I'll observe. Which was how Marcus acquired his first audience member. The planarian, whose name was Zix, watched as Marcus began the assembly. First, the frame, constructed from the solar panel housing, bent and bolted into a rough rectangular structure. Then the rotor, a cylinder wrapped in copper wire, hundreds of careful turns, each one placed with the kind of patience that came from growing up, fixing cars with his grandfather in a garage that smelled like oil and optimism. The precision is terrible, Zix observed. The windings aren't even uniform. Don't need perfect, need functional. The magnets came next, positioned around the rotor with careful spacing. Marcus had pulled them from 6 different devices, and no two were quite the same strength, which meant he had to test and adjust and test again, using nothing more sophisticated than a piece of scrap metal and his own sense of magnetic pull. By the time the second day rolled around, 3 more aliens had joined the observation party. The Metherian arrived with calculations proving mathematically that what Marcus was attempting had a less than 8% chance of producing usable current. Marcus thanked her for the math and kept working. The Kelvorian appeared to point out that the rotation mechanism, a hand crank Marcus had fabricated from a broken antenna assembly, would require an inefficient amount of manual labor to produce even minimal power. Marcus agreed that hand cranking a generator wasn't ideal and kept working. Thor showed up to remind everyone that even if, hypothetically, impossibly, the device worked, it would take constant operation to maintain any kind of meaningful power supply. Marcus nodded and kept working. "You're all very helpful," Marcus said, attaching the final connection between the rotor assembly and the crude rectifier he'd built from scavenged diodes. "Really boosting morale." "We're simply being realistic," the Kelvorian said. "False hope is often more damaging than honest pessimism." "Cool. Go be honestly pessimistic over there. I'm trying to concentrate." The generator, if you could call it that, without insulting actual generators everywhere, looked like something a particularly ambitious junkyard had vomited into existence. The frame was crooked. The windings were irregular. The crank handle wobbled. It violated approximately every principle of elegant engineering that advanced galactic civilization held dear. Marcus connected the output leads to a simple circuit tester, one of the few devices that still worked because it was too basic to be bothered by electromagnetic storms. He grabbed the crank handle. "This is going to be embarrassing for you," the Metherian chimed helpfully. Marcus started cranking. For a long moment, nothing happened. The tester sat dark and silent, a tiny mirror reflecting the skepticism of 7 alien researchers who were already composing the reports they'd write about the humans' failure. Then the needle twitched. Just a flutter, really. A tiny deflection that could almost have been imagination, or a loose connection, or wishful thinking. Marcus adjusted his grip and cranked harder, finding a rhythm. The needle twitched again, stronger this time. The rotor, despite its imperfect construction and mismatched components and complete lack of computational calibration, was doing exactly what basic physics said it should do. It was moving conductors through magnetic fields. It was inducing current. The needle swung into the positive range and stayed there. "Ah," Marcus said, trying to keep the smugness out of his voice, and failing completely. "Would you look at that?" The silence from the aliens was deafening. It was the sound of 7 different species simultaneously recalculating their assumptions about humans, primitive technology, and the difference between sophistication and effectiveness. Zix leaned closer to the tester. "The output is minimal. The output exists. Give me 10 minutes. Marcus disconnected the tester and carried his Frankenstein generator to the command center. He'd already prepared for this moment, running cable from the most critical systems and creating a distribution panel from salvaged relays. The generator wasn't going to power everything. It wasn't going to run the climate control, or the food synthesizers, or the entertainment systems. But it could run the essentials. He connected the leads to the distribution panel, checked his connections twice, and grabbed the crank. "Someone want to watch the emergency lighting panel?" The Vortilian moved to the panel, his eye stalk skeptical but attentive. Marcus cranked. His shoulders burned. His hands ached. The crank handle, not designed for prolonged human use, felt like it was trying to soar through his palms. He cranked faster, harder, finding a pace he could maintain, and watched Kukistor's eye stalks slowly rise from funeral droop to startled attention. The emergency lighting panel flickered. A single indicator light, red and weak, blinked on. Marcus kept cranking. A second light joined the first, then a third. The display panel, which had been dark for 2 days, glowed with faint amber readouts. "It's working," Kukistor said, and his translator couldn't quite handle the emotion in his voice. "It's actually working. The power distribution shows 0.03 kilowatts. Not much," Marcus admitted, his breathing getting heavy, but enough for basics. Environmental sensors, emergency comms, some lighting. If we set up a rotation, take turns cranking, we can keep critical systems running. He released the crank, and the lights dimmed immediately, the display panel fading back toward darkness. Conservation of energy was still a thing, even when you were showing off. The Metharian approached the generator like it might explode. Her crystalline body refracted the fading emergency lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. The efficiency is terrible, the design is crude, the materials are mismatched, but it functions. Yeah, funny how that works. The Kelvorian was examining the wiring connections, his advanced sensors analyzing the current flow. The human-created electrical power generation using pre-industrial principles and salvaged materials. This is unexpected. "The word you're looking for is wrong," Marcus said. "You were wrong. It's okay to say it. I won't tell your university." Kukistor's eye stalks swiveled to face Marcus directly, which was either a sign of respect or a precursor to violence. "Can you build more? Increase capacity? Maybe. Probably. We've got enough materials for 2, maybe 3 more if I'm creative. Won't be enough for full power, but enough to keep everyone alive and somewhat comfortable until rescue shows up." The planarian's scales rippled again. "This will require significant manual labor, continuous cranking in shifts. Yeah, welcome to primitive technology. It's very democratic. Everyone gets to suffer equally." Over the next 3 days, Marcus built 2 more generators with increasing help from the alien crew. It turned out that once you got past their attachment to sophisticated solutions, several of them were actually quite good with their manipulator appendages. The Kelvorian had steady hands and could wind copper wire with surprising precision. The Metharian's crystalline structure could sense magnetic field variations, making her excellent at positioning magnets for optimal flux. Even Kukistor contributed, using his multiple eye stalks to spot connection flaws Marcus missed. They established a cranking rotation, 2 hours per person per day, split into manageable chunks. The aliens complained bitterly about the manual labor, which Marcus found hilarious given that most of them studied species who spent their entire existence doing manual labor to survive. Academic privilege apparently was universal, but the generators ran. The emergency systems stayed powered. The habitat maintained enough environmental control to keep everyone alive. They even managed to charge up the emergency beacon enough to send an early distress call, cutting their waiting time from 3 weeks to 10 days. On the 8th night, with the temperature outside dropping toward the usual -40, and the 3 generators humming with whatever sound mechanical generators made when built from spite and salvaged parts, the expedition gathered in the command center. Someone had rigged a heater to one of the generators, which was technically wasteful but practically necessary for morale. The Metharian was on cranking duty, her crystalline arms turning the handle with metronomic precision. "I've been thinking," she chimed. "Dangerous," Marcus said. "When we return, I'm required to submit a report on this expedition. I'm unsure how to classify what happened here. Try Murphy's Law Galactic Edition. I mean your solution. We had 9 species worth of advanced degrees, centuries of collective education in physics, engineering, xenobiology, access to the sum total of galactic scientific knowledge, and none of us could solve the power problem. You solved it fine, Marcus said. Your solution was to wait for rescue while being cold and miserable. That's technically a solution. Zix's scales rippled. But you created a functional alternative using principles our species mastered and abandoned millennia ago. It's humbling. It's embarrassing, the Kelvorian corrected. We've become so dependent on our technology that we've forgotten the fundamentals. When our sophisticated tools fail, we fail. Cucasta's eye stalks drooped again, but this time it looked more thoughtful than defeated. The human was the least educated member of this expedition. No advanced degrees, no specialized training in xenogeology or atmospheric sciences, just a maintenance engineer who fixes things. Hey, I have an associate degree, Marcus protested. 2 years of community college, very prestigious. And yet you were the only one who could adapt. The only one who remembered that technology isn't magic, it's applied physics. The only one willing to build something ugly if it worked. The Mytharians stopped cranking, and another crew member took over without missing a beat. They'd gotten good at the transitions. I think, she chimed slowly, that we've been confusing advancement with capability. We're advanced, certainly, but the human is capable. It's not that deep, Marcus said, uncomfortable with the attention. I just know how stuff works. Engines, generators, mechanical systems, had to learn when I couldn't afford to pay someone else to fix my car. Economic pressure as educational motivation, the Kelvorian mused. Fascinating. Also, I grew up helping my grandfather restore old motorcycles. He had this saying, fancy tools are nice, but understanding is better. You can't buy understanding. Zix tilted his head, scales shimmering. Your grandfather sounds wise. He also said that any problem you can't solve is just a problem you haven't hit with the right wrench yet, so take the wisdom with appropriate context. The rescue ship arrived on day 10, right on schedule, its sleek hull reflecting Caresh 9's beige landscape in ways that made the planet look even more depressing. The crew had kept the generators running the entire time, maintaining enough power for survival and comfort. They'd even managed to charge some of the expedition's data collection devices, salvaging months of research that would have been lost. As they packed for departure, Marcus started to disassemble his generators, but Kex Thor stopped him. Leave them, they're just scrap metal and copper wire. They're evidence, the Vortilian said, his eye stalks focused on the crude devices with something approaching respect. Evidence that sometimes the primitive solution is the right solution, that simplicity has its own sophistication, that perhaps we've forgotten some important things in our rush toward advancement. Marcus shrugged. They're also functional backup generators for the next expedition. Assuming Caresh 9 ever gets another expedition, which honestly I wouldn't recommend. Planet's terrible. On the rescue ship, as Caresh 9 shrank to a beige dot in the viewport, the Mytharian found Marcus in the observation deck. I completed my report, she chimed. Yeah. What did you call it? Comparative analysis of problem-solving methodologies across species with specific focus on human adaptability in resource-limited scenarios. It's very academic. Catchy. The conclusion essentially states that humans, despite their relative technological inexperience, possess an unusual tendency toward practical improvisation. You take things apart to understand them. You build things that work rather than things that are perfect. You have a word for it, I believe. MacGyvering. MacGyvering is definitely a word. My people will find it fascinating. We haven't built anything with our own appendages in generations. Everything is fabricated, computed, optimized, but we've lost something in that process. The understanding your grandfather spoke of. Marcus watched Caresh 9 disappear completely, replaced by the familiar starfield of interstellar space. You know what the really funny thing is? Please enlighten me. Back on Earth, I'm just a guy who fixes things. Nothing special. No advanced degrees, no prestigious position. Community college and a grandfather with a garage full of tools. But out here, with all you super advanced species, I'm the primitive savage who saved everyone. The Mytharians' chiming took on a warm quality. Perhaps, occasionally, the universe requires primitive savages. The ones who remember that physics works the same, whether you're calculating it or cranking it. That's beautiful. Did you just make that up? I'm including it in my report. You're going to be very popular at academic conferences. Down on Caresh 9, abandoned but not forgotten, 3 crude generators sat in an empty research station. Their copper windings were irregular, their frames were crooked, their crank handles wobbled. By every measure of advanced galactic engineering, they were disasters. But they worked. They spun. They induced current. They turned motion into light, muscle into power, human stubbornness into survival. And somewhere in the galaxy, the universe that loved its cosmic pranks was probably laughing. Because the funniest joke of all was that the most advanced civilizations in known space had forgotten the simplest truth. Sometimes the best tool isn't the most sophisticated one. Sometimes it's just the one that works.